Story time with Mr. Beat.
What's happening? I'm Mr. Beat. I'm going to begin today's story by reading a quote for you. The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Surprisingly, that was from the Chicago Times, and they were describing probably one of the most beloved and famous speeches in American history, the Gettysburg Address.
Once upon a time, there was a terrible war called the American Civil War, fought between the Confederate States of America and the Union, or United States of America. The most terrible battle of that war, and in fact of all American history, was the Battle of Gettysburg. Fought over 3 days, it was the largest battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Between 8,000 to 9,000 soldiers lost their lives, and nearly 28,000 were wounded in the battle. Thousands of others went missing. During Pickett's charge, the Confederates' last, seemingly suicidal, slightly desperate rush to win the battle, an average of about 1 soldier died every second. I think you get it. It was a devastating battle to both sides, although it was a clear victory for the Union. When the battle was over on July 3, 1863, dead bodies, humans, and horses lay everywhere. Over the next few days, most were buried where they fell. A couple months later, private investors bought the land where the battle took place, and much of the area was then turned into a national memorial. On the morning of November 18, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln rode a train from Washington, D.C. to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Lincoln was getting sick that day, having the early symptoms of smallpox. He came to Gettysburg to help dedicate the Soldiers' National Cemetery. The next morning, Thursday, November 19th, a crowd of 15 to 20,000 crowded around a speaker's platform somewhere near the cemetery. Lincoln was actually not the main attraction that day. Edward Everett was. Everett, a famous politician, pastor, and teacher from Massachusetts, gave a riveting, passionate, and very long, clocking in at 2 hours, speech that was well received by the audience. Today, that speech, though, along with Everett, are long forgotten. After Everett's 13,607 words were done, Lincoln then rose and delivered his 273-word address in his distinct, high-pitched voice. Though no one can completely agree with the exact wording of the speech, this is the most commonly accepted version. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here give their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. Actually, they will, by the way. I was just going to say, they definitely will remember this. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln was done with the address in just over 2 minutes. There was no cheering after he was done, probably because of the surprise by the audience of how short the speech was. After a delay, many people did begin to awkwardly applaud. Lincoln was not too happy with the response, thinking the speech was not well received at all. However, the next day, Everett wrote the president praising his speech, saying basically that Lincoln said more in 2 minutes than he did in 2 hours. The speech didn't become famous until long after Lincoln had died, as the speech took on a more universal meaning to people across the country. Generations later, even Southerners were honoring the great words of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Though insignificant at the time, today the speech is well known to nearly every American. To many, the speech probably means more now than it did in 1863, for its ideals have yet to be fully realized. Those 273 words might just live on forever. The end.